And we are live. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the stream. I hope you're all doing well. I'm very happy to have you back again here for a new interview with a member of the European Parliament. Tonight, we will discuss with MEP Lukas Mandl from the political group of the EPP, so on the right side of EU politics. He is 42 years old. He has been an Austrian MEP since 2017. So 2017, that means that he arrived in the middle of the previous mandate, not at the beginning. Probably replaced someone mid-mandate. But now he's a vice chair of the subcommittee on security and defense, a member of the committee on foreign affairs, a member of the committee on civil liberties, justice and home affairs, of the special committee on foreign interference and in all democratic processes in the European Union. That's a long name. And finally, he's a substitute in the committee on employment and social affairs. As usual, before we start the conversation, I remind the house rules for anyone who would be new with us tonight. So our guest will be with us for 45 minutes tonight because I understand that he has a meeting at 8:15, so he will have to leave us a bit earlier than usual. But in any case, after he will go for his meeting, you will be stuck with me for another half an hour because I will have to. I will do a debrief with you to discuss what you thought of the interview, give some additional contextual elements if needed, that sort of thing. As usual, I've prepared my own question for Mr. Mandl, and I collect a question from you from Reddit and Discord. Of course, you can ask questions directly via the chat. I will keep an eye on it and pick among your suggestions. And so don't hesitate to react, to participate to the discussion and all that. But as always, don't spam and stay civil. I think at this stage the goal of these interviews, so to discover what your MEPs are doing in Brussels, what are their priorities, also for you to see the variety of opinion, what creates the European debates, and of course, as usual, we will not talk about national politics, only EU politics, unless it's relevant to EU politics and when it comes to national politics. But yeah, you know how it works. So with that in mind, let's not waste any more time and let's start this thing. So good evening and welcome to you, Mr. Mandl. Thank you again for coming over and participating to this interview tonight. So you heard me explain it to our viewers. Tonight we get to know you better, what you stand for in Europe, what are your priorities, what are your opinions on the EU, that sort of thing. So perhaps to start our conversation, could you briefly introduce yourself to the audience, completing what I already said in the introduction?
Thank you for having me, first of all, in this exciting program. I'm happy that we have the opportunity to chat tonight. My name is Lukas Mandl. I'm an Austrian member of European Parliament. You have already mentioned my committees. You also suggested that I would be right in the political spectrum. I would rather say I'm right in the center of the political spectrum.
All right. So perhaps to again, let's start at the beginning. Could you a bit tell us about how you got into politics and how you became an MEP later on? What's your story?
In 1994, on June 12th, in Austria, there was held a referendum on our membership. I was 14 years old, and it was, so to speak, my first campaign. Even without knowing what a campaign would be like. But I joined this, I would say, movement of the Austrian citizens, which in a vast majority, 2/3, voted in favor of the membership on June 12th, 1994. And on January 1st, 1995, we became members. So my generation is the first, I would say, EU citizens generation of Austrians in an adult age. We never were adults without being EU citizens. And that's the one side. The other side is I was a school student representative and then active in the youth of the Austrian People's Party. And step by step, my interest in Europe remained and my interest in politics grew. And I'm more than happy that after 10 years in the regional parliament of my home region, Lower Austria, the largest region of Austria, which was beautiful. Also being a vice mayor of my hometown, Gerersdorf, was beautiful. After that, I ran for the election for the European Parliament in 2014. I could join then the parliament in 2017, as you have mentioned during the previous mandate, and I was re-elected in 2019. And yeah, I always wanted to contribute to a good representation of the Austrians on European level, because that's what we promised in 1994, and what was promised that time, that being a member state means that the citizens who are Europeans obviously will be represented on European level. You know, this light issue in the offices of the European Parliament, which is actually good for saving energy and dealing with climate change. This promise has to be kept each and every day. That's why parliamentary representation of the Austrians on European level is a beautiful endeavor and an important mission I'm on. And I also always wanted to contribute to a strong Europe to the outside, a free Europe to the inside, an integrated Europe, because that's our destiny. Europe is our destiny, the destiny of the Europeans. So that's at least trying to keep a long story short.
And so, like you mentioned, you arrived in 2017, so mid-mandate. Was it difficult for you to start as an MEP while when you arrive, everyone has already been an MEP for already 2 years, almost for 3 years? They're already up to speed, they already have their own file. So how does it work for someone arriving right in the middle of the mandate?
Maybe looking backwards, the most important thing was that there was nearly no opportunity to choose in any kind and in any way what committees I will be working in and what priorities I can follow, because I had more or less to follow up the things that were already settled, and that's an important lesson from that time. Actually, when I remember entering the European Parliament in the first weeks and months, even I had the idea that someday one should write a book about how to enter the European Parliament, because there's so much also administrative burden, by the way. And there is so much you have to deal with at the same time in order also to come to legislative work and parliamentary work, which is a core business of a parliamentarian, of course, on behalf of the citizens. This was really, really a lesson, but interesting, and hard work and a good team, of course, are of utmost importance, and then it works. Most importantly, I would say each and everybody who becomes elected, no matter whether it's in the beginning of the mandate or in the middle, should actually have a clear orientation where she or he wants to work on, and what issues and what committees, because it begins at the first day after the election that this is negotiated in the delegations, in the groups, in the parliament, and to have a clear orientation and clear priorities seems to be of utmost importance.
And speaking of priorities, since 2019 you got to choose your committees. What are now the topic that you chose as your own in this parliament?
Yeah, since my intention always was to contribute, as mentioned, to Europe with more strength to the outside and more freedom to the inside, it was clear to me that I wanted to work in the Foreign Affairs Committee as well as in the Home Affairs Committee. And I also wanted to contribute to Security and Defense. That's why the SEDE committee seemed important to me. And freedom also comes along with, I would say, entrepreneurship on the one side, and opportunities for each and every employee, especially in the field of lifelong education, lifelong training. And that's why the EMPL committee, or as I call it, the labor market committee, also seemed to be interesting to me. And that's why I joined these committees, in order to follow what I actually also had promised to the voters as my program, so to speak, to contribute to Europe with more strength to the outside, more freedom to the inside. And I also have been engaged with the Western Balkans even before I entered the European Parliament in 2017. This was also clear that this should become a priority. And as all of you know, maybe, sometimes in parliamentary work, you have to decide whether a new priority will be part of your agenda in the future or not, which you had not expected before. And what I hadn't expected before is, for example, that I would be requested to become the chair of the Korean Peninsula delegation for South and North Korea in this very parliament. But I quickly learned that this is extremely interesting due to the importance of both countries, South Korea and North Korea, of different kinds. For us Europeans, South Korea is an important partner in many different fields, economically, but also in terms of security and politics. And North Korea is a security threat to the world, and also an issue when it comes to human rights to the inside. And this is why this became important. And then the Middle East is a clear interest for me to closely work with Israel, much closer than the EU yet does, frankly.
Okay, so let's start maybe with defense. So what you're doing in the CD committee, so the subcommittee on defense. The EU does not have a hard competence on defense. So what is actually CD doing on a daily basis? What do you do on a topic that is not per se a EU competence?
Well, I guess security is something people expect from the European level. So a parliamentarian always has to build bridges, in my view, bridges between the institutions and the citizens. And you are completely right, of course, that there are not many competencies on European level when it comes to security and defense on the one side, but when we speak about the citizen side, which is the important side in a democracy, what they expect from the European level is, in the first place, security. And that's why we should deal with it. The Security and Defense Committee deals with the EU military missions and is always scrutinizing them or asking for information from these missions, also trying to be in close contact with the military persons who, on behalf of Europe and its member states, the member states of the European Union, are conducting these missions. And which is even as important to me is the future work on future visions for security and defense. We have, for the very first time in history, and that's something since I guess some who are involved into parliamentary and institutional work on European level watch this program. When I would have the opportunity to share just one thing to remember is, for the first time in mankind's history, Europe has a European Defense Fund, which is meant to be invested in innovation and technology, in research and development. And this is of utmost importance. And this fund has been in place now for a little more than a year. It contributes to employment, it contributes to small and middle-sized enterprises, as well as to the large ones in Europe. And there is something we need for strategic autonomy, and that's the overall title of what the Security and Defense Committee tries to deal with, or should achieve, or let's say make steps forward to this vision of strategic autonomy. In my view, what Europe needs is strategic autonomy, and this means, in the first place, having innovation and production within Europe. We must not become a continent of consumption alone, of consuming goods and services produced or innovated in other parts of the world, because on the long term, of course, nobody can live only from consumption. And contributing to innovation and production is one of the main tasks of this European Defense Fund, which seems to be of utmost importance. Last point on that, because you directly and specifically asked on the Security and Defense Committee, last point is really PESCO, the Permanent Structured Cooperation of member states in military fields. Just 2 weeks ago, new projects in military fields where specific member states work together have been established. There are 60 such projects, and also new, like the European Defense Fund, new is the decision that for 1 year the regulation has been in place that we can now also include non-EU member states in such permanent structured cooperation PESCO projects. And actually the United States Canada, and Norway are already involved in PESCO, in one PESCO project actually. It's about military mobility. And among the things I try to work on, and which are among the visions I try to follow, is that the UK and also Switzerland, as non-EU member states, one day will be involved in such PESCO projects, and this will contribute to our security, to the security of Europeans in daily life.
And one thing that comes up often, since we're talking about defense and strategic autonomy of the EU, is what should be the relationship between EU defense and NATO. Should the EU go on its own? Should it be completely independent from NATO? Should it stay closely linked to NATO? What should the relationship be?
Very important question. Thank you for that, because that's on the mind of many who talk from the outside about EU security and defense politics, and also from the inside. Sometimes it's clear. NATO provides a security umbrella for us, for all of us, for Europe, for actually the so-called political West, for the part of the world which is civilized in terms of democracy and rule of law, and is more or less representing the values also Europe represents and tries to defend in the world. And I claim that NATO is, of course, a security umbrella also for Austria, which is not a NATO member state, as you know. It's a neutral state, but I understand the meaning of NATO, and the meaning of NATO will remain. And strategic autonomy of European Union will not only be complementary to NATO, it will also contribute to NATO, because what the larger NATO member states expect is more investment in security by maybe the smaller NATO member states. And when we as European Union will better understand that investment in security means to invest in future, in proper dwelling, in the security of the generations to come, this will also contribute to what can be understood as NATO investment. So thank you again for the question. It's clear that a more strategic, autonomous Europe will also make NATO stronger.
Mm-hmm. One final question on oh, I lost the video. Okay, that's better. One final question on defense before we move on to the next point is we are talking about defense. There is a lot of debate of whether and how many soldiers should the EU have under its flag for a rapid reaction force. But beyond that, and that's something that Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the Commission, mentioned during the State of the Union speech in September, is the question of the governance. The problem is that, for instance, we have the Eurocorps that exists since 2007, but they have never been deployed because it requires unanimity, and has never been unanimity in Council about that. So do you think that in the interest of having a meaningful European defense, we should maintain the principle of unanimity in foreign affairs and defense decision?
No. The direct answer is no. Unanimity in foreign affairs issues in the Council of Member States governments, as I call the Council, actually harms Europe. It makes us weak. It makes us slow. We need a new EU treaty. It's clear. And this new EU treaty has to meet the challenges in the 21st century, and also has to reform the structures of the European Union, and to overcome unanimity in these issues of foreign affairs and other issues in the Council of Member States governments will be of utmost importance in the new EU treaty. And that's what we have to work on. And going deeper into the first part of your question, I want to clearly emphasize that Commission's President Ursula von der Leyen has requested from the High Representative Josep Borrell in her mission letter in the beginning of the mandate. Sometimes it's good to remember the sources from the very beginning, that Borrell should, in the first place, contribute to defense issues. And I'm happy that finally he seems to act on that. after the Afghanistan disaster, which was not only a US disaster, it was a disaster of the political West generally. And I would even say that at least for 20 years, the situation was more or less calm due to the US intervention. But after that, Borrell actually announced and then really made a proposal for future deployment opportunities of military forces when we need them, because we were actually not able to rescue people from the Kabul airport in Afghanistan on our own. We needed help from the US. We can be happy that we got help from the US, but this is not a proper understanding of EU strength, and that's what has to be changed. And as you have mentioned, the Eurocorps, the battle groups, were never deployed. So as often in European history, by the way, no problem, often in European history, we learned step by step how things do not work. So now we learned how things do not work when it comes to deployment of troops when we need them. So I hope the proposal of Borrell and the steps ahead, also conducted and supported by specific member states, will lead to a better system. The member states who have taken action on their own here, and I appreciate that very much, to push the Commission forward in that regard, are, as far as I remember, Germany, Slovenia, and the Netherlands. And they made major steps forward because they drew the attention on this important topic.
All right, that's quite interesting. So moving on a bit to another committee on which you work, which is LIBE. So when I was looking a bit into what you did in Parliament, I noticed that you actually were a shadow rapporteur on the report on the state of the rule of law in the EU. So it was a report that was adopted this year. So the rule of law is a topic that has been quite in the current news, let's say, over the past few months. So I wanted to know, what is your assessment of the state of the rule of law in Europe?
Thank you, Orson, for this question. First of all, I would call the rule of law a promise. A promise. It's a promise of the European Union to the inside and to the outside. So it's really, really at the heart of what Europe means and should mean for now and for the future. When I say it's a promise to the inside, I mean each and every EU citizen must be able to expect rule of law no matter where she or he lives. And to the outside, of course, each and every investor, each and every person, each and every human being, no matter what situation in life, can expect properly rule of law in place in the European Union. And this is at risk due to some behavior in some member states. Of course, always Hungary and Poland are mentioned, but there were also issues in Romania, in Slovakia, and Malta. So we really, really have to strengthen a proper understanding of rule of law, and we have to strengthen rule of law. As you can imagine, I'm a strong defender of the principle of subsidiarity. I'm not a centralist. I claim to fight for more freedom to the inside in the European Union. But actually to provide more freedom to the European Union citizens requires in the first place to have rule of law in proper place. And that's why it seems to be important to me that we work hard on strengthening rule of law and also on conditionality. That's I would say, the important term in that regard. On conditionality, that of course it needs some leverage, if not a country, because a country exists of people and people deserve rule of law. We're on the side of these people of these countries. But when a government disrespects rule of law, there has to be some leverage in order to provide the people with rule of law. And if I may say one last point here, what I don't like about the discussion is that sometimes for people, for citizens, it looks like an institutional fight on competencies or something like that. That's actually not true. It's something completely different. It's a fight for rule of law for each and every person, for each and every citizen, for each and every EU citizen. And that's why it's core business for the European Commission as well as for the European Parliament, and it should be one for the Council of the Member States governments in order to defend this freedom and to defend the citizens' rights of each and every person in the European Union.
And still on the rule of law, actually today they at the CJU, so at the European Court of Justice, the Avocat General gave his opinion on the legality of the so-called rule of law mechanism that allows the Commission to suspend some EU funds for member states that would break the rule of law. And so the Avocat General said that the mechanism was legal, which would allow the Commission to use it against Hungary and Poland, for instance. But the Parliament has been actually threatening and to sue the Commission because it did not already use this mechanism that it could have used for over a year. Do you think that indeed the Commission should have already used it, and that with the opinion of the Avocat General in the court, the Commission should go ahead and activate this rule of law mechanism against whatever country is concerned, but mainly Poland and Hungary?
The short answer is yes, it should. The longer answer is I want to apologize. I'm extremely sensitive when it comes to language and words in that regard. And you, as everybody does, no matter, you mentioned Hungary and Poland. So we have to consider what would a Hungarian citizen or a Polish citizen think if, for example, I would speak that way, or officials in the Commission or here in the European Parliament would speak that way. They would immediately think, oh, this is something against my country. Oh, no, I'm for my country. Yeah, we are also for these countries. That's what we should share. We acting when we defend rule of law by this leverage, by this conditionality approach, then we act on behalf of the citizens of these very countries. We are on the side of the Hungarians and the Polish people and the Romanians and the Slovakians and the people of Malta and others when it comes to defending rule of law, even against the wrong political decisions of governments or of some government entities or administrative entities in these countries. And this is of utmost importance, because otherwise we speak this and I also have this temptation very, very often. We speak this bubble language, and it can't be understood maybe then by regular citizens, for example, of these before mentioned countries.
Okay, no, that's pretty indeed true. That you need to differentiate between the government and the citizens. Indeed, it's the government in place that are infringing the rule of law. It's not the citizens themselves, not the people themselves. You're right. A final question on this question of the rule of law. This time regarding the government of Hungary. So you're from the EPP, and for a long time the ruling party, so the Fidesz, was part of the EPP. And I received question on why the EPP waited so long to take action against what Orban, so Viktor Orban and the Fidesz was doing to kick him out of the EPP, and whether you think that the fact that the EPP took so long to react to it had a role in making Hungary, the government of Hungary, become like a illiberal democracy.
Yeah, thank you for this important question, because it tells a lot about parliamentarism and about understanding of cooperation in parliaments between parliamentarians acting on behalf of their people. You mentioned illiberal democracy. What an awful word. What a contradiction in itself. Illiberal democracy. What would that be? I was very sad already in the beginning when this term appeared for the first time, and it's clearly meant as a provocation, and it remains a provocation against each and everybody who tries to uphold liberal democracy. And this is what the vast majority of members and other people, for example, in this House of the European citizens, the European Parliament, is doing each and every day: uphold liberal democracy. So there is no such thing as an illiberal democracy. And that's what we have to fight for, and what we already claimed. For example, my home party in my home country, Austria, already years ago, when this term appeared for the first time, claimed that we would be and will remain fighting for liberal democracy. That's what it's all about, actually. We could go deeper into that, but maybe we don't have time for that now. That's the one side. The other side is that colleagues who have been in this parliament for longer than I have been here have a lot of examples for situations when Viktor Orban party was held back. By whom? By the political family. His party was a member of the European People's Party family in the past. You may not remember that, but it's many years ago. But Orban played a game considering and reflecting on death penalty, actually. Mm-hmm. In Europe, something that's completely against the values Europe wants to represent and to uphold within the European Union. But it was clear in European People's Party that this is a clear no-go that time. And this is one example of many that it's not always bad to have different opinions in a political group. And to be very frank here, I was not in favor of the Orban party, even if I had personal fights verbally with Orban himself, and even if I had many disagreements, and I still have many disagreements with him, even more than ever before. I was not in favor, in the first place, of them leaving European People's Party, because it means things would get worse. This was my prediction. And guess what? Things got worse. Even within a few weeks after they left the European People's Party, things got worse on a very negative level. They got worse. And one example is that's really very concerning for me and disappointing. In Hungary, and it was in the media, you can find it in Hungary, a bookseller was sentenced for selling a book. And I don't want to go deeper into the question what kind of book that was or what the content was, because this is not of concern for me as a lawmaker or a parliamentarian. What's an issue for me as a parliamentarian is that each and every bookseller in Europe must be granted the liberty and the freedom to sell books as much as he or she wants, and no matter what books that would be. If things like that appear in our European Union, the situation is really bad, and we have to deal with it. And this is one example for many others that it was true. Things got worse.
Okay, no, that's quite interesting indeed. Thank you for being straightforward on that. Let's move on again. This time a bit more generally on the relationship between Austria, your country, and Europe. So yeah, like you mentioned, even if we don't, I was thinking when you said that, I just realized that myself. We often forget the fact that Austria is a rather recent member state in the end, because you joined indeed in 1994. So you rather recent in the EU, but for us it's as if you were there for forever. And do you see, like, how did you see in Austria the society evolve? Like when you say you're from the first generation that grew up with the EU, did you see like a difference between the older generation that grew up in the EU and the younger generation that grew up in the EU?
Well, in the first place, in many regards, society in Austria was always open-minded, open to the world, feeling European, even before 1989, before the fall of the Iron Curtain. So I would say there were two major developments which made a difference for people in my home country, in Austria, and for society in general. The one was the fall of the Iron Curtain, and the other was the membership to European Union. Just imagine Vienna, our capital, Lower Austria, my home region, was very close to the Iron Curtain. It was, so to speak, the last outpost of the political West, even if we were and we are and remain a neutral country. We were a liberal democracy and we remain a liberal democracy. And we were more or less in these times of Cold War, the end of the Western world. And this meant a lot because we were cornered, geographically cornered that time. And this opening meant a lot for mobility, for contact to each other, for interaction in border regions, even for families and relatives who stick more together than that time. And this was a huge development, important development for the Austrian society, for all of us. And the membership in EU brought major steps forward, especially in terms of economy and employment. Due to, I would say, better competition conditions in Austria, due to better opportunities for education, for vocational training, for academic careers, and so on. EU membership after the fall of the Iron Curtain made a huge difference and contributed a lot to a positive development of Austria, I would say. And I also want to emphasize that because I have the privilege to negotiate as a rapporteur the Switzerland report of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And I guess we Austrians, we can share as transparent as possible with our Swiss neighbors our experience, because sometimes transparency and the lack of transparency leads to a lack of confidence. And what we need mutually with Switzerland, EU and Switzerland, is confidence. And this will be based on transparency about many questions that also appeared over the decades for Austrians, which are now appearing for people in Switzerland regarding price dumping and dumping in terms of social affairs and of wages and so on. But within European Union, we have solutions for that, and we live a very good life as EU members with these solutions. Since I know how political communication sometimes work, I'm not claiming that Switzerland would become an EU member state. That's not on the agenda. But what is on the agenda is, as we all know, better structural relation when it comes to the involvement of Switzerland in the internal market.
Another question on Austria, and on as an Austrian MEP. So you're Austrian, but since you're German speaking, people tend to put you in the same bag, so to say, as the German. So and I know this is the topic of jokes in Germany and Austria about this relationship, but how do you explain? Would you explain the difference, the political difference between the Austrian and your German colleagues? What makes you different in the end?
Well, I guess there are much more jokes about such differences than actual real points. I would say on a global scale. And when it comes to issues I deal with, Germany is a NATO member state, Austria is not a NATO member state. Germany, due to its size over decades, already had the impression to be more or less in the center of what's going on geopolitically. And even while Austria is centered geographically on this continent, due to a famous, for Austrians, famous quote of a pope that Austria would just be the island of the blessed. So it was during the Cold War that this pope suggested that it would be like paradise in Austria, because we would not be affected by Cold War and what was going on during the second half of the 20th century. Due to these developments and due to the difference in size, maybe Austrians for a long time, even myself and many fellow Austrians also lived in that understanding that it would be easier not to get involved that much. But also in the last 3 decades, it's clear for us that we are affected by everything that's happening to our continent. And that's important. We are affected, Austrians, each and every European is affected by everything that's happening to the continent. If there are hybrid attacks by Lukashenko, by the Lukashenko regime towards the Polish border and the Lithuanian border, it also affects Austrians and French people and Spanish and Swedish. And that's true for each and every positive or negative development for Europe, that it affects us all. That's why it was so important to get involved after the fall of the Iron Curtain and through the EU membership. And maybe that's difference because Germany is a large NATO member state. Even before the fall of the Berlin Wall, already Western Germany considered itself as a core player, as a main player in geopolitics. Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm looking at time, so I will go into my 2 final questions before you have to go to your meeting. So my first question is, if you could change anything about the EU, like you snap your finger, you change something in the EU, the way EU politics works, what would you change and why?
I would try to establish a new EU treaty, because the Treaty of Lisbon is outdated by far. After this Lisbon Treaty, we had the finance crisis, the migration crisis, the pandemic, the era of not only digitalization but artificial intelligence, the uprising of China as a geopolitical actor, as well as an economic actor, as well as a development aid actor, active in countries which are interesting for development aid. So, and EU got larger, the number of member states has risen. So there are many, not only good reasons, but actually clear requirements that expect from this very generation of politicians to establish a new EU treaty and to reform the structures in order to put the EU in the position to act stronger to the outside, to provide freedom to the inside, and also to make it understood that providing freedom needs proper structures inside the European Union. And if I could go, I know it's a large wish. It's a big thing we are talking about here. But if you ask what wish should be fulfilled when it comes to EU decisions, it would be clearly the wish for a new EU treaty.
Okay, well, that's interesting. And my final question, which is the traditional question on the channel to finish, where do you stand on the debate about a federal European Union? Are you in favor? Are you against? Are you undecided? What do you think?
Well, I'm considered a federalist, and as I support the European Union principle of subsidiarity, as already mentioned before, which is an essential part of EU DNA, I would say. I also support the approach of, for example, having an elected EU president, a directly elected EU president, and I'm wondering who she will be, but one day we will have an elected EU president, and this will provide more sense of unity, a clear voice to the outside, and these are clear standpoints when it comes to federalistic approach.
Well, thank you. That's very clear. So before I conclude and start the debrief, I will give you the opportunity to say a final word to the audience before you go and have your final meeting of the day.
I thank you for this program, which is really enlightening, I guess, this Brussels proper scenery. I thank you for having me here. I thank all the viewers and participants and discussion partners here in this chat. I especially thank you for being able to talk on Twitch, because I have heard a lot about Twitch already, but I never used it before. It's my first Twitch moment. Thank you also for that. Take care, stay healthy in these still crucial pandemic times, and contribute to liberal democracy, because it means a lot for this generation and the generations ahead.
Well, thank you, Lukas Mandl. Chat, make sure to thank him. You can follow him on Twitter. You can see his handle under the video feed. And on this note, I wish you a good evening, Mr. Mandl. And chat, stay with me. We'll start the debriefing. Have a good evening, Mr. Mandl. Bye.
Take care.
All right, guys. So let's start the debrief. It was quite interesting. Let me know in the chat what you thought about it. I'm taking my notebook where I took notes on the different stuff. So first thing he mentioned when I said, "Oh, the EPP is the right of EU politics," he corrected me to say, "Oh, well, actually, I'm right in the center." It's true, because the EPP is the right and center right, the Christian Democrats. But I always say to simplify on the right, because then when you start comparing, say, oh yeah, but the EPP and Renew, on the Renew you have the liberal part, so they are like center right, almost right wing on economics. So
let's say analysis, but within EPP we also have a spectrum, I would say, and I just talked about myself, and I would say within this spectrum I'm right in the center, and I just wanted to have the opportunity to share this.
No, you're right. I mean, again, like you mentioned, the EPP is a spectrum. It goes from the center right to a more classic right, conservative, and it's the big house kind of party that was always intended like that. But yeah, anyway. Then again, I put you on the screen since you since you stayed a bit and you're reacting. That way, everyone can benefit from your comments. But whenever you have to leave, go ahead.
Unfortunately, I have to leave, but I'm more than happy that we had the opportunity. I thank you for your flexibility, and I look forward to our next contact.
Likewise, thank you. Bye bye. All right. Well, actually, I'm gonna close Zoom as well. There we go. So yeah, we had an additional comment, but he was right, so that's why I put him back on the screen. Then you mentioned, what do I have on my Justin Trudeau and Macron centrist moment? Yeah, I mean that's the complexity of EU politics, because you could say that on certain points, people from Renew, so the centrist, are more right-wing than some people in the EPP. So, it depending on the topic, it can be a mess. Because like the right is not the same, depending on the country, depending on, of course, the different topics, etc. There's a joke that the absolute center politician has no opinion on anything. I didn't know this one, but that's a nice one. I'm trying to think if the absolute centrist would actually have no opinion on anything. I don't think the absolute centrist would have no opinion on anything. He would just agree with everyone. Then we discussed, we mentioned indeed that Austria is a rather recent member state, 1994. So that's indeed rather recent, given that it's a Western Europe country. Then that's interesting. I note of that because I wanted to explain that. So he said that when he joined the parliament in 2017, so he arrived in the middle of the previous mandate, because the previous mandate started in 2014. So an Austrian MEP left, and so he came to the parliament to replace that MEP. And he said, well, actually, the big problem is that I didn't choose my committees. And it's true, because the way it works is that at the beginning of the mandate, of each mandate, every national delegation within a political group will negotiate the membership in the committees. So when they arrive, so let's say you have the election. 2 weeks after the election, well, you will have the representative of the let's say the EPP, the French EPP, the Austrian EPP, the German EPP, etc., etc. They will gather and they will say, well, I have 10 MEPs. I have one who I want a seat, and I want seats in IMCO, so my internal market, foreign affairs, defense, etc. So they're doing basically what they want, and then they negotiate with the other delegation who have their own request. And in the end, well, you dispatch the different seats that the EPP have in the different committees among the national delegation, and it's a negotiation, an internal negotiation to it. So MEPs in general, when they arrive, they say to their delegation, okay, I would like to be in these committees, but then they can be in different committees because they didn't manage to negotiate everything. So in his case, since he arrived in the middle of the mandate, the negotiation was already done, so he could not choose. He could only take what was left on there. You agree with his ideas on defense? Well, we're gonna discuss defense in a second. Well, actually, we're gonna start discussing it now. So he put forward he talked a lot about the cooperation, so the importance of cooperation. He said that for the first time there's a European fund on defense, which is aimed at funding cooperation initiatives. So think like drone initiatives, buying military assets together, that sort of thing. Because the EU has, if we had more time, I would have asked the question, but the EU has no actual army, so you're not funding an army, you're funding cooperation projects, especially since member states today have different priorities when it comes to military and foreign affairs. So of course that has an impact on what the EU can do on this front. We also talked about NATO, because in the debate around European defense, there's a part of the debate, because of the French mostly and a bit the Greeks, there is a debate about the relationship with NATO, because I mean, if you follow the news a bit over the past few years, for instance, Macron and the French in general, they're not very fond of NATO. They want to stay very independent of it, and they said, oh well, NATO is brain dead. The EU should go its own way on defense. And so the idea of the French is to, as much as possible, unplug the EU from NATO, while remaining members of NATO, but unplug the EU defense from NATO and allow it to be more independent and build its own capacities. But it's a view that is pushed back by many member states for many different reasons. Sometimes it's just because they are very, let's say, skeptics or worried about what the French want to do when it comes to defense. There's always this suspicion that France is not defending particularly the European interest, but in fact is pushing its own agenda under a European pretense. Sorry about that. And then you also have a number of member states, like in the east, like the Baltic state, Poland, etc., who are very, very reliant on NATO, especially since they are obsessed with Russia. So they say, no, we need NATO, we need the US to defend us. We can't do anything without NATO. That's crazy. We need the European defense go through NATO. And finally, you also have like the Nordic states who are always a bit iffy when it comes to defense, are quite happy to let NATO do its thing and rely on the American umbrella. NATO is important. We need our own organ. The US is becoming less active in the world, so we need to depend on each other and not on the outside world. Which is the argument that the EU, that French are putting together. Which is true. We see that we've seen over the past few years that the US is disengaging from Europe and instead going to Pacific, indeed to counter the rise of China. So you had an interesting quote while talking about Chinese action in other countries. Interesting countries for foreign aid programs. What are these and why are they interesting? I probably missed that. Explain a bit more. I have a couple of ideas of what he meant. If you can give me a couple of more details on what he said exactly, I can I'll be able to react more precisely. But otherwise, I'll be able to talk a bit about China and foreign aid program. But to finish on the whole NATO thing. On the other end, those who say, oh yeah, we should accept the fact that the US is going away from Europe and they're going away. We need to be able to defend ourselves. On the other end, you have those who say, yeah, but it's unrealistic to expect member states, the wide majority of member states, to be able to not rely on NATO. It's impossible. The reality is that the reality of today is that when it comes to defense, most member states are dependent on NATO, and it's not gonna change by snapping your finger. It's gonna take long time, and we should not necessarily unplug from NATO. We should keep them on board, because the US, even if it's less active in Europe, it's still a big ally. It's still a much bigger disincentive for anyone to mess with Europe rather than whatever Europe could scrap together in terms of army. Because in terms of serious army in Europe, today there's only France left since Brexit. Okay, let's go back to China. So Chinese action in other country, interesting country for foreign aid program. As implying foreign aid is beneficial. So here, there's two sides to it. There's two ways we can discuss about that, because depending on how you interpret the idea of interesting country for foreign aid country. Are we talking about China giving foreign aid program, or us giving for foreign aid programs to counter China, which is two different things? But to cover a bit both, there is indeed something at stake here, because we have seen, like, over the past 20 years, China becoming a bigger foreign actor, and often using foreign aid as a way to buy diplomatic and political support in poorer part of the world. The textbook example being Africa. China invested billions upon billions in Africa, going to the African countries, saying, oh well, you want money, we can give you money, and we're not going, we're not even going to ask you about transparency, about rule of law, about democracy. We don't give a shit about this thing. Just take the money, make cooperation program with China, with Chinese project, and well, we won't be like those pesky Western, the European, the Americans. You can do whatever you want. So at first, of course, this country just took the money. It was free money for them. But since then, and it was the same when there was the Chinese project called the Belt and Road Program, which is the big investment program of China to, again, investing tons of money around the world to boost up its influence. But since then, countries have been coming back a little bit from the generosity of China on that, because they realize that actually, in many cases, the foreign aid from China was coming with strings attached, but different kind of strings attached, or it was not as beneficial as they would think. Because, for instance, like when they were investing, China was investing in, let's say, infrastructure project, they were realizing that China was actually literally exporting its workers. So you would have thousands of Chinese workers that would go work on these construction sites, etc. And so the money would not be used to pay to pay national workers. It was just like we were importing Chinese families and workers who would work on these Chinese projects, so that it remained only under Chinese control. And also the fact that the money did not always deliver, that there was a problem of big interest rates, so it was becoming countries were entering a bit of a debt spiral, that sort of thing. So they are slowly coming back from it. On the other side, there is indeed this idea from Europe and other countries, say, when they see China pouring money, say, well, we need to answer that, because otherwise we're gonna lose the race. Pretty much. And on the EU side, and also the US side, now they're saying, okay, we need to counter China with our own foreign aid program, because otherwise they're going to kick us out in terms of influence from this country. So there is now a bit of a race in terms of influence through foreign aid programs, because foreign aid program, beside the aid aspect, it's about influence to a large extent. It's about influence in the end. Moving on, what do I have? He was pretty clear on the fact that he does not like the principle of unanimity when it comes to foreign affairs and defense, because he says that it's leading nowhere because it's paralyzing the system, which is true because I mean I mentioned it already during the interview. And he said it himself. For instance, the Eurocorps. So since 2007, technically, the EU has 1,500 soldiers that it could deploy if it wanted to. But since 2007, they will never deploy once because there was never unanimity within the council, so within the institution that represent the member state, to actually deploy this soldier. So they never did anything apart from raising the flag at the European Parliament. So, you know, that's rather limited. And so a lot of people want to get rid of this unanimity rule, and that's why also he mentioned the idea of the treaty change, but I'm going to discuss that a bit later. Then we discuss what? We discuss the rule of law for a bit. I like the concept that the rule of law is a promise. It's not an institutional thing, it's a promise to citizens. So that's a very nice way to put it. These are democratic conversations, that's why they take time, because they are democratic. Should we get rid of it? That's a good argument. That's a good argument on this, because the other side of the coin when it comes to unanimity, when it comes to defense and foreign affairs, is that we're talking about something that is extremely and inherently sensitive for member states, that is core to the national sovereignty. And you could say, well, how could it be acceptable for a country to have its, let's say, let's take an extreme example, to have its soldiers die in an operation that you didn't want it in the first place. So you're opposing an operation, but you say your soldiers are going to go anyway, and they're going to die. Or you having the EU that is taking a diplomatic position that goes against the national interest you're having in terms of foreign affairs, for which you have been democratically elected, which is a fair argument, and that's the difficulty now when it comes to most of the debate when it comes to unanimity, because in many cases the topics on which there is unanimity rule are topics that are very, very closely linked to national sovereignty. And in a way, if they were to lose this power, they were to lose unanimity in a way that would make these countries, at least the idea of member state, irrelevant. Because why would you need these governments if in the end the EU is doing things anyway? So that you have a deeper aspect to it when it comes to the political balance of member states, etc., because it touches on the legitimacy of national governments as well. But you're right, like Petrozit is saying, it's a balance. Unanimity slows down progress or even prevents any kind of progress. But on the other end, you have the idea. Okay, where do we put the balance? But in our time, self-determination is not optional. That's the idea. I mean, that's the problem. In our times, you could say, yeah, there's the debate. Do we go our own way, or are we do we show solidarity with each other? That's the big debate. And that's why you need this debate. But well, that's a big debate. We could speak a long time about that. I'm gonna move on. On rule of law, so he mentioned the classic things coming from the EPP, which is not false, and they're saying that people always focus on Poland, not Hungary, but there is not only this country. You have Romania, you have Malta, you have Slovakia. So you have quite a few countries beyond Poland and Hungary, which are the worst case scenario. But there are other countries that have some issues with the rule of law. And he also was right in the sense that when he said that the rule of law is not a fight on competencies, like on Poland, if we take the example of Poland, we always talk about it's a fight between what is the competence of judiciary institution, what is the role of the constitution. So it gives the impression that it's only a purely like a artificial legal like competence kind of thing. where in fact has very concrete consequences on citizens, and the rule of law has a direct impact on citizens, because that means that whether they have a fair judicial system, I mean, are they free to do whatever they want, etc., etc. Is there any debate or work on new forms of ratification for citizens? Well, yes and no. Yes and no, because there's the Conference on the Future of Europe, which is a new form of participation for citizens at EU level. It's imperfect, far from being perfect, very clearly, but that's something new. Actually, we had an interview a couple of months ago about that with an MEP about that, and the MEP was saying, well, even if it's imperfect, I think that it should stay in the future as something that we should explore. You have the so-called petition committee in the parliament, which personally I think is the most useless committee in the history of committees, but that's another topic. You have the citizen initiative, so there are some experiments. But in terms of new beyond that, it depends on the treaty. You fall back to what can the treaty allow or not. But there is some attempt. The Conference on the Future of Europe is one of these attempts. Moving on. Can you get van der Leyen for an interview? Well, that's not up to me to decide. That's up to her to decide. But maybe I'll make a request. But don't get your hopes up. Huh? Well, who knows? Who knows? Yeah, he reacted quite strongly when I said Hungary. Poland said no, the problem is the government, it's not the citizens. Which is true. It's true. I acknowledge that, but sometimes you go for the facility. You take the option, the easy options to simplify a topic, so that it's colloquial. It's easier to discuss. Then we talked about the EPP. That was quite interesting. That was quite interesting because I said that, when we discussed particularly the case of Hungary and Orban, he said, the illiberal democracy is a concept that is an oxymoron, like Ikaros was saying in the chat. It cannot exist. I'm against it. As Austrian, we are against it, etc., etc. The EPP was against it, and it's true. But at the same time, he was saying, even if I'm very critical of Orban and Fidesz, I was not in favor of them leaving the EPP, and it's true because the Austrian EPP were among the national delegation in the EPP who wanted the Orban and Fidesz to stay in the EPP, and the argument was exactly what he said. They said, if we let them go, we will lose any kind of leverage over him, and he will go much worse. He will embolden the far right, etc. So better to have him with us, however uncomfortable it is. But at least we can keep some form of a leash on him. We can control and push him to not go too far. While if we let him go, he'll be free to go to do whatever he wants. He will get even more radical, and that's gonna be we're all gonna lose in the end. The other argument against that was to say, actually, Orban was actually just manipulating the EPP. He was just pushing every time a bit too far, knowing that he would have to take one step backward, but still, he would have pushed a little bit, he would have gained a little bit, and in the meantime, he would enjoy the protection. The big political protection that being part of the EPP grants, which is the case. I mean, if you take the back when the Orban was part of the EPP, there were big differences in the way the EU was treating Poland and Hungary, because the government of Poland was from the ECR, and there is no majority. They're not part of the majority in the European Parliament. They're not part of the majority in the Council. So it was easy to take decisions against them, to criticize them. While on the for Orban, since he was part of the EPP, which is which was part of which was the majority in the council. The president of the commission still is there in EPP. The parliament, the EPP is the main political group in the parliament. It was making it very difficult to criticize or to take action against Orban, because they would not act against one of their own. So there is a bit of an argument on a bit like the hen and the chicken. What comes first? Is Orban manipulating the EPP, or is the EPP keeping a leash on him? That's another debate. But in the end, Orban kept pushing more and more. I mean, like he mentioned, at some point he was even playing with the idea of he was pushing for the reinstatement of the death penalties. That's how far it went. CP, so I mean, yeah, it's Civic Platform wins in Poland next time. Well, in Poland next time they're gonna go as a united opposition. So even if Civic Platform is the EPP, so it's the right center right group party in Poland, but they will go as part of a united opposition with other groups. So they will not win on their own. They will win as a coalition, but likely it's possible that they will get if they win as a coalition, they will get the prime minister, because they're the biggest. It's kind of the same in Hungary. In Hungary, I mean, the problem here is that the governments who have been in power for quite some time now, they had such an effect on the rule of law that they killed the chance of the opposition parties to go alone. So the only hope for the opposition to circumvent everything that the governments did to try to kill them by killing by putting a leash on medias, on the judiciary system, that sort of thing, is to go united, meaning like left, right, center, they don't care. They just say, okay, anyone who is not with the government, let's just unite, because what matters is to get rid of them, and then we'll sort it out later on. What else did we talk? He mentioned a bookstore in Hungary, even if he didn't go into detail. So that's a good story, because indeed in Hungary, what happened? There was a law that was adopted, saying that it would be forbidden from putting LGBT propaganda. You can't see me, but I'm putting the quote marks to put LGBT propaganda, LGBT ideology as they call it, in contact with minors, with schools, with kids, etc., etc. And so they sanctioned a bookseller who was selling a book, a children's book, that was explaining what is LGBT, what are LGBT rights, that sort of thing, to kids. So book for kids that was explaining what are LGBT rights. And so they said, oh well, that's against the law, so we are sanctioning the bookseller for selling that book, which again was made a stink in Brussels. You can say, what's this? What is this? Where we punish booksellers for publishing a book about LGBT rights? That's rubbish. So that's another point on the long list of criticism against Orban when it comes to the rule of law. What else do I have? Yeah. The one thing I found interesting in the end, especially, is when I asked the question about what he would change in the EU. He mentioned, he had an answer that was quite different and similar to what many MEPs say. Usually the MEPs say, oh well, I would change the council, I would get rid of the unanimity rule, and that's it. They focus on either they want the right of initiative for the parliament, or they want to get rid of the unanimity in council. And he had an answer that was going deeper than that. He was saying, no, we need to redo the treaties, because they are obsolete as they are. The Lisbon Treaty is not fit for what we need now in Europe. So we need to redo things from top to bottom, basically from top to bottom, which includes, given that what he explained before, reviewing the unanimity rules, probably the powers of the parliament, that sort of thing. And he mentioned as reason for why the Treaty of Lisbon, which is the latest, the most recent big treaty of the EU, which was adopted after the in 2007. Yeah, 2007 and entry into force in 2009. It was adopted after the debacle of the EU constitution, but mostly to take into account the entry of the 10 member states in the East. So there needed to be some updates in the institutional framework. So that was the Lisbon Treaty, but we haven't touched the treaty since 2007. And there is a big debate today in the Conference on the Future of Europe on whether it should lead to reopen the treaties. And a lot of member states do not want to reopen the treaties because they are afraid of what it would mean. They're afraid of it would mean that it possibly mean that they would lose power, but they also are afraid of what people would they would have to do referendum. They're afraid of what people would vote, especially following what happened in Brexit. They know that they're afraid of what people would vote. So I thought it was quite interesting to have this bigger vision, this bigger picture vision, saying there is a problem with the framework in itself. It's just not a problem. It's not just the council. It's not just the parliament. It's the framework in itself is flawed. It's obsolete. We need to review it because we have very concrete problems to deal with. So you mentioned AI, China, the pandemic, migration, that sort of thing. But yeah, that was what I had on my notebook. I'm just reviewing here quickly. Nothing else. I'm going quickly through the chat. If you have questions, that's the moment. I don't see anything in terms of questions, so I will start my conclusion then. So I hope you enjoyed the interview. Interesting as always. Who is the next guest? I'm going to come up. Usually you would see me on Sunday for the news review, but like I mentioned last week, there will be no news review this week because I'm not in Brussels. So the next time you will see me is on Monday, where we'll, potentially on Monday, because on Monday I have an interview with a French MEP, so it will be in French, a Renew French MEP, Christophe Grudler, and then on the Tuesday I will have a Renew Czech MEP, Ondřej Kovalic. No news is good news. Aww. You ate that much my news review, No Brains? But anyway, so you will see me next time on Monday. You meant bad news. I prefer that. Otherwise I would have taken it personally. But yeah, next time is Monday because I'm away. As always, but I will post the schedule on Sunday if I can. Yeah, I know I love the Sunday news review too, but I'm out of Brussels, so you know, what can I do? Not much. So I will post the schedule. I don't know if I will do it on Monday or before leaving on weekend. I will see. But in any case, you will have the schedule for next week when the time comes. As always, if you like what you saw, well, hit the follow button. If you're feeling generous, subscribe. And I'm posting I put in the right place. As always, don't hesitate to follow on my other channels, Twitter and Discord mostly. That's where the fun stuff is happening. And on this note, well, I wish you all a good evening, and I will see you next week. Have a good one, guys. Bye.